DEI and wokeism, Andor looks and is Acolyte.
I found Star Wars Acolyte to be a bit of an inconsistent mess, and if you're going to spend over $300 million on a product, there needs to be some redeeming qualities. And at best, it was an okay show. At worst, a waste of time. But the truth lies somewhere in the middle of those 2 points, and anything in the middle of those 2 points just isn't good enough. In other words, the worst kind of failure.
Largely forgettable.
It had some interesting themes and sought to add a bit more depth to the Jedi Order. But the acting was spotty, the writing terrible, with some questionable moments to moments plagued with poor execution. Now, something some of you may find interesting is I also had a hard time connecting to the story and main character, which kind of flies into that statement of feeling a connection to the protagonist or antagonist through representation. Yes, I look like Amandala and Charlie, but I've never believed color or gender tells the best story. It can tell a different story, and those stories need to be told within context. But those stories are not really relevant to the Star Wars universe, so I can understand the pushback to some extent, seeing the inclusion of obvious racial, gender, and sexual orientation themes. But Acolyte never tried to tell that story. Yes, it looked the part, but so do other successful stories with the same diverse cast. In fact, I'll go as far as saying there isn't a single political statement in Acolyte's runtime that differs from the original Star Wars messaging. There's a desire to expand, not necessarily change. So why all the hate? And why did Acolyte fail? Let's talk about it. When evaluating the success or failures of Acolyte, it's important to note the driving motivations behind greenlighting the show. It's important to consider its viewership, its cultural impact, its competition, what people liked and didn't like, and most importantly, its finance, which incorporates its monetary value, budget, and opportunity cost. And there's nothing difficult or controversial in what I've just said. This is a standard analysis that's practiced across the board when it comes to reviewing any content. But here's where the story gets interesting. Because when I asked a few guys why Acolyte failed, their response was not what I just mentioned. It was DEI and wokeism. Now, when asked to define what these terms mean, they struggled somewhat, but it amounted to the inclusion of a diverse range of characters. Characters that look nothing or act like them. But the main point to take away here was DEI and wokeism is bad and nothing good can come from it. But if DEI and wokeism is bad and nothing good can come from it, then can someone explain to me please, what the hell is Andor? And why did one DEI show succeed when the other failed? Because on the face of it, Andor looks and is Acolyte. Let's talk about it.
Fruits from the same tree. An Andor comparison.
In watching the trailer for Andor, the first thing that hits you is its tone, realism, and use of sound to ground you in its universe. The music, cuts, and monologues are well placed, which emphasizes the mystery, wonder, story, and characters. One thing I never considered though was the actual diversity on display, but maybe I'm just gender colorblind like some of you claim to be. The lead is a brown actor of Mexican origin who goes by the name Diego Luna, a departure from the old Star Wars movies which casted Mark Hamill and Hayden Christensen. The supporting actor or actress of the show is of Puerto Rican descent, and she goes by the name Adria Arjona, a departure from the look of Natalie Portman. And then we see depictions of the Empire, which is primarily illustrated by Caucasian men in charge, sticking to the woke trope of white men are evil, oppressors, diversity is good. But even within those evil ranks, we have Denise Goff as Dedra Mero, who serves as a female lieutenant and supervisor in the Imperial Security Bureau, something I don't think we've ever really seen in the earlier Star Wars movies. Now, our first introduction to Dedra consists of her being surrounded by a predominantly all Caucasian cast, which would be in direct contrast to the rebel forces. One thing to note about this scene is the only other individual who really receives some level of characterization and development is Lieutenant Supervisor Blevin, who just happens to be another person of color. Now, Dedra isn't at the top of the food chain, so she isn't calling the shots. But she does call the shots when it comes to the two incompetent villains played by Kyle Sola and Alex Ferns. Notice how they look. Something else you may have noticed is the main rebel faction on the planet Aldani, which consists of more diversity within the show. And here we also get introduced to our first LGBTQ representation. Two individuals of different ethnic backgrounds to boot. Now keep in mind, there is no reason for any of this to be here. This is by all means woke. Moving on, we also come across the Empire's forces stationed on Aldani, and from a diversity point of view, they're in contrast to the rebels. But that's almost expected from modern day TV invading forces. They all tend to look more or less the same. The only main departure here is Lieutenant Gorn, but even that gets switched up because we realize he fell in love with a native and has now chosen to help the rebels defeat the Empire. In fact, he goes further and sacrifices himself for the cause. How noble. And everything I'm saying isn't just secluded to one planet. We see the same thing on Ferrix, almost like for like. The Imperial forces generally look the same, and the natives tend to be more diverse. Even this scene that's supposed to be hard-hitting plays out the exact same way. Now, if you take a step back and venture into the realm of politics, you'll see the individuals financing and pulling the strings. These operations are headed by multiple women such as Genevieve O'Reilly and Elizabeth Dula. And guys, I could keep going on, but you get the point. So the question is, how did Andor escape the DEI curse if it's the exact same as Acolyte? Well, it's simple. They're not the same. Because the problem was never DEI or any depiction of LGBTQ. It was and is the writing. This is not how Andor separates itself from Acolyte. It's the way any successful form of media or art form separates itself from failures. Game of Thrones isn't good because it's predominantly a white cast. In the same way Lost wasn't good because it had a diverse cast. Same thing for Amazon's Fallout and HBO's The Last of Us. These shows are good because you can connect to the characters in a way the writing permits. And I think most of you know that. So when you say woke or DEI to describe a product, you're not saying anything of substance. You're not engaging in an actual discussion or critiquing the art being presented. What you're actually doing is mixing yourself with a cast of extreme individuals, and you almost scapegoat and shield their true feelings, which is... I think there's a genuine discussion to be had here. It's possible to critique race and gender swaps or even fundamental changes to a story, because at the core of it, there's a fundamental difference between a bad adaptation and a good story, and both are not mutually exclusive. So how about we drop the bullshit and have that